Joe Phillips, who is in London. Joe, thanks so much indeed for joining us. What are we expecting from Liz Truss? I mean, obviously there'll be, what do they call it, a honeymoon period? And that's going to be difficult in itself just because of the challenges that she's inheriting.
I'm not sure she's going to get very much of a honeymoon period, Adnan, to be perfectly honest. I mean, don't forget, she's been elected by the Conservative membership, which is a very, very tiny proportion of the British voting electorate. She also has only got the support of about a third of the Conservative MPs at the parliamentary party. So, you know, the Conservative Party over the last few years has been incredibly divided, not least over Brexit, but also the manner of Boris Johnson's departure. And I think her honeymoon period is going to be very brief, despite the calls for unity that we've heard from across the Conservative Party spectrum. I mean, I have to say, it's not an auspicious start, is it? I've been watching the feed, and they've had to move the lectern out of the torrential rain. You know, is she going to do it inside instead of outside? Is she going to do it from underneath an umbrella with drips coming down? And as you and I both know, it's the worst thing possible for television crews is to try and do something in the pouring rain on the cameras and the cables. She's got a huge in tray and she's got to move very quickly. But I think what she says in the next few minutes will be an indication of the sort of government she wants to lead. The other thing, of course, is who is in her cabinet. Now, is she going to be smart enough to bring in people who weren't necessarily loyalists? Is she going to bring in some fresh faces, or is this just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, as the saying goes?
Yeah, Joe, that's a really, really important point. I don't think many people outside of the UK, certainly non-specialists, they won't understand what Boris Johnson's cabinet was like. Boris Johnson effectively put together a cabinet that was designed to do one thing and one thing alone, and that was to deliver Brexit for the country. OK, sure, the referendum was won and the UK has now left the EU, but he was criticised heavily for not bringing in experienced politicians who had previously served in government cabinets, and the accusation was that he, being a man who doesn't really understand detail too well, didn't have members of his cabinet who could tell him what certain problems were regarding their own briefs of those ministers. So what kind of cabinet does she have to bring together to confront these challenges that are facing the country?
Well, I think after the last couple of years of Boris Johnson's rule, which is being based on bluster and boosterism and, you know, so-called charisma, I mean, frankly, if charisma is Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, I'd rather do without it. What we need now is stability. We need serious, sober, sensible government. So she does, as you say, need to have those people who've got attention to detail. She needs to have people who know very well that there's an election coming in 2 years' time. So this could be a very short-lived government. I think it's unlikely that there'll be a snap election. I don't think the country would have the patience for that, having spent the entire summer while the Conservative Party have indulged in this election, and we've seen, you know, everything coming from the high energy prices to real fears about the cost of living this winter, plus the ongoing war in Ukraine. So she needs to have some people around that are going to be able to reassure not just the public, but, you know, the markets as well, because what she says and what she does is going to have a huge effect on the stock market. And everybody will be watching that to see what happens.
When you look at certain ideas that Liz Truss has, Joe, she says she wants to cut taxes. She said it again over there. She's been asked in interviews who's going to benefit the most from those tax cuts, and she admits that it's the richest people. But she believes in that, I think, discredited idea of trickle-down economics, which during Reagan and Thatcher's time didn't work at all. She says she wants everyone to get healthcare in the NHS. She wants to increase defence spending. All of that is going to take, I don't know, hundreds of billions of pounds. The country doesn't have that kind of money.
No, absolutely. And as Simon was alluding to just then, I mean, the eye-watering figures that are being bandied around at the moment about what it would cost the country to have a cap on energy prices, people are talking about £100 billion. Well, you know, you can do all of this stuff, but you can't do it all in 2 years. And it's all very well saying, you know, we're going to make the NHS great. Every Prime Minister has said that, you know, since it was invented. But how are you going to do that when you've got massive staff shortages? And some of those staff shortages are inevitably due to Brexit. You know, you've got people who are working as nurses You've got people who are working as healthcare assistants. You've got people who are working as radiographers and pathologists who won't be able to afford to carry on working with the cost of living. And the two things have got to marry up. And she seems absolutely determined, as you've just said, to go for this low tax or tax cutting economy. She's already said previously that she doesn't believe in redistribution as a means of making better off. So I think, that was a fairly vacuous speech. We've got no plan at all. Doctor's appointments, well, fine. You might be able to get a doctor's appointment, but if there's nobody to take that x-ray or that blood test from you, it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. There are some really fundamental problems, and you can build houses as much as you like, but unless you say, right, they've all got to be solar powered, we've got to do something about the cost of public transport. We've got to do something about schools that are crumbling and falling around us. She talked about safe streets. Well, the Conservatives have cut police numbers, and despite the fact that they keep saying, oh, we've got 20,000 more police on the streets, that's only got us back to where we were in 2010. So she's got a long way to go, and I think people, there was a lot of whooping and cheering in Downing Street from the party faithful and her MPs, but I'm not sure that the general public will be quite so welcoming. She needs to move quickly, and she needs to do something to make people feel a little bit more secure.
Given how she's been speaking during the campaigning to become Prime Minister, what do you think her relationship with the European Union is going to be like?
Probably slightly better than Boris Johnson. I think she seems to me to be somebody who will say what seems to be right. She needs to work out who she's talking to, because as you know and I know, all politicians are talking to many audiences at once. She's been running this campaign. The only people who could vote in it were Conservative Party members. Now she's talking to the country. She's also talking to her party, but she's talking to the markets. She's talking to business. She's talking to workers. I mean, she's already hinted at the idea of getting Britain working again, as though we sit around doing absolutely nothing. And she alluded to that in one of the hustings during the leadership campaign. Well, many people who are doing 3 jobs to try and make ends meet will take a pretty dim view of that sort of attitude. And I think she needs to think very carefully and probably get on the phone pretty quickly to some of her European counterparts and Ursula von der Leyen and some other people. I mean, the big sticking point, of course, is going to be Northern Ireland. And that is in turn going to have a huge effect on how her relationship is with Joe Biden and the American presidency. All British prime ministers want to go to Washington. Washington's a bit lukewarm at the moment because they're very frightened that the Northern Ireland peace process is going to unravel if this Prime Minister follows in Boris Johnson's footsteps by ripping up the international agreement on Northern Ireland.
Jo, thank you. Really always appreciate it. You know that. Jo Phillips speaking to us from London.